A good way to look at the strategy is to say it's the approach, or it's a framework, or it's guardrails that we put in place to allow us to make effective product decisions. Effective product strategy should help facilitate innovation, and to a certain extent should enable innovation. How can I write the user story if I don't know who the users are? How can I write the user stories if I don't know why people in principle would like to use the product? So what's the basic need?
You've developed yourself a product strategy model.
It's really important to recognize that a strategy ultimately is not something that is set in stone.
Teams, when they come up with the product strategy, they write this document, they spend all this time, and then they put it on the shelf and kind of forget about it.
There is a correlation between how old your product is and how much innovation, uncertainty, risk, and change it tends to experience.
Welcome. This is an Hour of Innovation podcast. I'm your host, Lyoshin. Roman Pichler joins me today to discuss the role of product strategy, frameworks and tools, and how effective strategy can drive innovation while balancing execution and long-term vision. Welcome, Roman. Thank you for joining me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't we start with a question that there are many strategies for business and product and technology and so on. Can you help me understand the difference between them and how maybe they align between each other?
Sure, yeah. So I think it's helpful to recognize that there are different strategies, different types of strategies typically in a business, in a company. So, there's the business or company strategy. And then, that for me, that's the approach that the business has chosen to achieve success, make or keep the company as a whole successful. And I find it useful to use a dedicated framework to do that. So Roger Martin's Playing to Win framework can be very useful in order to formulate an effective business or company strategy. And then we have a portfolio strategy, assuming that the business has more than a single product. So if you have a group of products, think about a product portfolio like Microsoft 365, formerly known as Office, with PowerPoint, Word, and Excel. Then it probably makes sense to create a strategy or formulate a strategy for that group of products that essentially communicates the approach chosen to maximize the value of that group of products, of that portfolio. And then we have a product strategy. Product strategy does essentially the same thing for an individual product or product line. So what's the approach chosen to make or keep the product successful? And then, some businesses also use a technology strategy that says which technologies are used to help the business as a whole and then help individual products and portfolios succeed. But yeah, again, I think the first point is to recognize that there are these different types of strategies. And I've already alluded to it, that it can be very useful to use different tools, different frameworks to capture those strategies and not just think, there's strategy. Let's talk about strategies. Yeah, that's a good idea. But then again, they're different types. And, as I said, they deserve to be treated to a certain degree. I think in their own, they need to be treated carefully. And, you need to recognize that there are some important differences.
Right. So sometimes people may be confusing between product strategy and product backlog. Can you please define what each one means to help people understand these differences better?
Yeah, sure. So for me, a product strategy really states has four elements. So as I said, a good way to look at the strategy is to say it's the approach, or it's a framework, or it's guardrails that we put in place to allow us to make effective product decisions. And, the four key elements that I like to capture in a product strategy. The first one is, who are the users and customers? Who are the people who should benefit from the product? What is the reason? Then the second one, what is the reason that people should use the product or should pay for the product? So what's the value the product should create for the customers and users? What are the specific needs it should address? What's the problem it should solve or the benefit it should generate? Then what are the desired business benefits? How would it benefit, or how does it benefit the company? Is it, for instance, to generate revenue, achieve a certain profit market, to reduce cost, increase productivity, develop the brand? But what is the impact, the positive impact on the business? And then particularly important for commercial revenue generating products, what are the standout features, those aspects of the product that give it an advantage over competing offerings and encourage people to use it instead of those alternatives. So those are four key elements, again, I find very useful to capture. But these elements, these pieces of information are pretty high level. And while, again, I find it really helpful to state them and clearly state them, articulate them, and bring clarity to what the current strategy is, so we can then talk about it. We can discuss if that strategy is the right way to move the product forward and achieve success in the future. It's pretty high level. So it lacks a lot of detail in terms of then taking that strategy to build software and be able to ship it, deliver it. There's not enough information available. So we have to then refine that strategy or translate it into something more detailed. And ultimately that is the product backlog. So the product backlog, the way I look at it is it's, a collection of items that essentially tell us what needs to be done in order to progress the product in an effective manner. And I like the notion of working with a focused, goal-directed product backlog, using a product goal or a product outcome, whichever term you prefer, in order to focus that list of items that needs to be implemented. And the way I do it is that I derive an outcome-based product roadmap from the product strategy, and then use the next outcome, the next product goal on that roadmap in order to direct the product backlog. And if that's how you do it, you then get a link from the product backlog items. So pretty detailed, you could say those items represent pretty detailed product decisions back to the product strategy. So ultimately your product backlog then implements your product strategy, which I think is rather nice.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. So if I can summarize really quick, the product strategy is basically, like you said, it's a guardrails to help you make decisions so you know in which boundaries to play. And product backlog is actually list of things needs to get done to get
Absolutely.
to your goals. And could be multiple goals along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And, sort of a common technique many people associate with the product backlog or product backlog items will be user stories and user story writing. And, a user story, as the term says, is a story about how a user interacts with the product, or maybe a specific aspect or piece of functionality of the product. But how can I write the user story if I don't know who the users are? How can I write the user stories if I don't know why people in principle would like to use the product? So what's the basic need or the primary need that they'd like to see addressed? If I'd argue if I write product backlog items, create product backlog items, or write user stories without having an effective product strategy, I'm in danger of speculating, and I'm in danger of just building stuff, no matter if it's truly useful to the users and customers, and no matter if it's generate a positive business impact or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then if I tie it to agile principles and practices, sometimes people like to stay flexible and adopting agility and things like that. But then you also have defined strategy already. So how to balance that, being flexible, and then at the same time being tied to already something that has defined outcomes or defined goals?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question. And I think traditionally, strategy is often seen as something that is done once in a blue moon. So you have a strategy stage or a phase, and you may spend several months with strategy work, and then you've crafted your strategy. There it is. Hooray. Now let's execute it for the next 3 to 5 years. And that may have been an appropriate way of working 30, 40, 50 years ago. It might still have some relevance for very hardware heavy products, but certainly for digital products, and given the amount of simply, technology change that we've experienced, just quite recently. You think about all the changes that are being introduced by artificial intelligence. I don't think that approach is helpful any longer. So, I like to look at the strategy work more as a workflow or work stream that needs to be attended to on an ongoing or continuous basis. So to make this more concrete, the simple answer is you start with an initial strategy. You have to often spend a little bit of time to discover an effective strategy initially. And then once you have that strategy, and once you've derived your product your product roadmap, and then your product backlog, and you've started implementing it, you monitor how your product is doing and how effective the strategy is, and if it's still valid. And a good way to do this is to have quarterly strategy review meetings where you inspect the product strategy, you inspect the product roadmap, and then you adapt those documents, those artifacts as appropriate. And I like to suggest a collaborative approach. I like to suggest involving key business stakeholders and development team representatives in those meetings. But as you know, those quarterly cadence can be fairly coarse-grained, or quarterly meetings can be can be quite a few things can happen in a quarter potentially. So I like to suggest that the person in charge of the product spends a little bit of time, maybe half a day per week, or with strategy work, with looking at the relevant KPIs and looking at the relevant pieces of data, seeing what the competition's up to, and keeping an eye on any emerging trends that may be relevant for the product. So again, you're not caught out by any surprises. The whole point of working with a strategy really is to offer that guidance and make meaningful decisions and help shape the future, you could say. But if that's what we want to do, we do want to make sure that the strategy is always valid, and we want to make sure that we don't miss out on opportunities to make the strategy even in a way better, and the product better, and create more value. But equally, that we don't overlook any threats, and we're suddenly being caught out and finding ourselves with our backs against the wall. That's usually not a good position to be in.
Yeah. So you've developed yourself a product strategy model to help product managers with execution, and first defining and then execution and things like that. Can you please do a little overview of what that model look like and relationships of elements and things like that?
Yeah, sure. So the model that I've developed consists of 4 artifacts. There's a vision, there's a product strategy, there is a product roadmap, and then we've got the product backlog. I've added the product backlog because I think it's really important to avoid that there is a strategy execution chasm, or to put it differently, to ensure that the strategy does get translated into ultimately discovery and delivery in an effective manner. But then there are also the people who are involved. So for me, the right individuals are the person in charge of the product, development team representatives, and then key business stakeholders. So individuals whose expertise and support is needed in order to make the right decisions and move the product forward. That might be, for a commercial product, a marketeer or a sales rep. And some of those individuals, like a marketeer, for instance, may have to actively contribute to progressing the product, for instance, by creating or updating a marketing strategy or the marketing collateral. And then if it's a larger development effort, and generally if it's a larger product, you may also want to include other product people who work on the same product, who maybe have a more specialized role and look after a feature or an area of the product. So those are the people. And then the third aspect would be the processes that you use. And for me, the 2 types of strategizing work that I like to distinguish: product strategy discovery. And that's the work that we do when we formulate a strategy for a brand new product, or when maybe our product needs to be revitalized and we want to exchange the lifecycle, make a bigger, significant change to the product, and change the strategy accordingly. So then it can be very useful to take a little bit of time and carry out some research, some experimentation, but also make sure that the strategy, the new or significantly changed strategy, has been looked at, has been tested, has been validated, and is based on empirical evidence and not just beliefs and opinions, or possibly wishful thinking, or whatever a powerful stakeholder says. And then we have the second process, which I've already started to describe very briefly: continuous strategizing. So that's the idea that we carry out the strategy work on a continued basis, on a weekly basis, and then on a quarterly basis. So those are sort of in brief the key ideas, the key elements.
Okay. And then what are some of the common mistakes that people make when trying to go through the process and figure out the product strategy?
Yeah, that's another great question. There are probably quite a few mistakes, but the ones that come to mind is not testing, not validating the strategy, not taking the time to ensure that the statements that we capture, for instance, who the users and customers are, or what needs the product should address, that we've actually we've looked at them carefully and that we've made sure that these statements don't contain any significant risks and assumptions, or to put it differently, that we have empirical evidence that suggests that these statements are correct. For instance, because we've carried out some direct observations, or we've carried out some customer interviews, maybe some problem interviews, or because we've built a throwaway prototype in order to address a technical risk, for instance, or because we've done some business modeling to ensure that the business benefits that we aspire to creating are actually realistic and can be achieved. Another mistake would be to allow stakeholders to, in a way, drive the strategy and have a strategy that is really a collection of stakeholder requests. So strategy is as much about saying no as it is about saying yes. There's this, many people will know the famous Steve Jobs quote where apparently he once said, innovation is not about saying yes to every idea, but saying no to most ideas. You've got to choose carefully. And I think that's absolutely right. So when we say these are the target customers and users for our product, we equally say there's a large group of people, or a much larger group of people most likely, who we're not going to address, at least not at this stage. Or if that's the problem we want to address, the customer user problem, then there are many other potential problems that we're not going to address, at least not for the time being. So coming up with an effective strategy means making some tough decisions. So don't shy away from that. Don't shy away from difficult conversations with stakeholders, and don't let stakeholders just make those decisions. By all means, be collaborative, involve people. And I guess that'd be then another mistake. So one mistake would be, to be too accommodating and just sort of, try and broker a strategy which might then be built on weak compromises. And a third mistake might be not involving the stakeholders and development team members enough, and then might lack that expertise. As a product person, it's hard to know everything and get all the decisions right. But maybe even more importantly, the statements in the strategy might not be entirely clear to them, and they may not buy into them. They may not support them. So my experience suggests that when you involve people in a decision, particularly important high impact decisions like a strategic decision, they're more likely to support that decision and to see it through, actually implement it, follow it, rather than just paying lip service to it and then going away and doing what they think is right. And so, that happens as long, again, as you are being collaborative, and as long as you take a genuine interest in what they have to say. It doesn't mean that you take on board every idea and fulfill every request. Again, then, you're falling back into the previous mistake, but it means, taking that sincere interest and making an effort. And then another mistake I've seen organizations make is that the initial strategy is too sketchy and too high level. So while it's okay to have like an initial draft strategy and then iterate over it and then refine it and correct it, which is actually something I recommend, you need at least some basic insights into the market and some basic understanding of who you're dealing with and what the domain and the problem space is. If you lack that, then often it's best to stop the strategy discovery work, but really do a little bit of light upfront market discovery or market research work, whichever term you prefer. And then the final one, you should have asked. The list goes on and on. The final one is to confuse the different strategies, and particularly confuse product strategy and portfolio strategy. And that can be comparatively easy, maybe not quite so easy if you look after a portfolio like Microsoft Office, a product family where you clearly have those distinct apps. But if you take a product like, say, what comes to mind, Netflix, the Netflix app or Uber app, if I look at those kind of products, then for me they're not singular or atomic products. They are more product bundles, composite products, and then again, it can be very useful to distinguish between a strategy for the entire Netflix app, which would be then very similar to a portfolio strategy. You might call it a bundle strategy, but essentially it's the same thing. And then strategies for the individual product parts or products like, streaming and, series and movies and games they have now. I'm not an avid Netflix user. The rest of my family is, I guess. And then have separate strategies for those more specialized products that are contained in the bundle. Yeah, no, common mistake is to mix that up, or not just to distinguish between those different levels, and then maybe just have one higher level portfolio strategy, call that the product strategy, and that strategy doesn't provide enough guidance for the product teams that work on, say, games or the streaming part of the Netflix app or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. That's my ultimate list.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's a good list, so people can see where things may go wrong and address those early on. And I guess when you were explaining all this, I was thinking about your idea of quarterly check-ins on the strategy and making sure it's still applicable, it's still good. It kind of validates itself, and if there are something missing or something new needs to be added or removed, you can do it then.
That's right.
So
Absolutely. So I think it's really important to recognize that a strategy ultimately is not something that is set in stone, or it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be something that is fixed. You should look at it as an adaptive framework, or a framework that is flexible, that needs to be adapted. It's based on what we know at a given point in time. As our knowledge changes, we should adjust the strategy to leverage opportunities and mitigate threats. I mean, again, it should always be a forward-looking set of decisions that help us shape the future and influence the future, so that our product generates as much value as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And then sometimes teams, when they come up with the product strategy, they write this document, they spend all this time, and then they put it on the shelf and kind of forget about it. What are your tips for them to get to those quarterly reviews, or to get those periodic check-ins validated and things like that?
Yeah. So I guess, part of avoiding that the strategy is not really put into action is to connect it to a roadmap, preferably an outcome-based product roadmap, and then the roadmap to the backlog, so that the strategy really guides and directs, you could say, the discovery and delivery work. And you could use the framework, the model that I sketched out earlier, in order to ensure that, or you could use another approach. But again, the important thing is that there is no gap, no chasm between strategy and between implementation or execution. And then the second aspect for me is to adopt a collaborative approach and involve the right people, and come up with an initial strategy together, and then together review that strategy on a regular basis. I think that ensures that the strategy and the strategic decisions, that people are aware of those, and that they stay relevant, and that hopefully, people use the strategy as a foundation, in a way, of their work. Again, something that offers hopefully meaningful guidance.
Mm-hmm.
And then, in terms of how do we then technically review the strategy, well, a key aspect is the product performance, in the terms of how much value the product is creating. And, that means using the right KPIs, key performance indicators, in order to measure that performance, in order to measure that value creating capability, looking at relevant trends, be it technology trends, regulatory trends, which are important for some industries. Think about finance or healthcare, for instance. But also trends in terms of consumers. Think about the recent cost of living crises in the Western world. And of course, any did I mention the competitive landscape? Any changes in that space? Important to watch out for, keeping an eye on the competition, and also any changes in the portfolio or business strategy. If those higher level plans, you could say, change, then that typically has a knock-on effect on the product strategy.
Yeah. I always like analytics. I'm a numbers guy, and my next question is about KPIs and success metrics. If there are any specific ones that you recommend, or maybe some of them are generic, or maybe they have to be really thought through and defined for specific product, depending on the product. What's your approach to this?
So generally, I'd agree with the second statement that you made, that really we shouldn't be tempted to use a generic set of KPIs and apply that to our products, but rather we should look at the value that our products are meant to create, and then based on the goals that we have, based on the user customer goals or the user needs, and based on the business goals, and then on the specific outcomes or product goals on a product roadmap, choose the right KPIs. And that's essentially, one of the little tools frameworks that I've developed is a KPI selection framework, and that's essentially what that framework suggests. Having said that, of course, in certain industries and for certain product categories, there's certain KPIs, certain metrics that are popular for a good reason, because they're typically relevant. And so, it's not to say that you shouldn't be inspired at all by what other people use in terms of, their metrics and KPIs, but always carefully look at your product, look at the strategy, look at the roadmap, look at the specific goals that you want to achieve, the specific outcomes, the impact that you want to create with your product, and based on that, choose the KPIs. And if you find, it's a customer satisfaction score, or it's a monthly recurring revenue, and many other people use those metrics, that's cool. But maybe, those metrics aren't particularly useful for you, at least not at this stage of the product lifecycle, and then choose those that are more helpful.
Yeah, that's a good point, that at different stages of the product development, you may have a different KPIs. In my organization, we call them success metrics. So when we start doing something, we first say, okay, we need to do XYZ, and these are going to be the success metrics. And once we release something, we need to measure how successful it was, and we allow some time to measure it, and then maybe go back and redo something or make adjustments and things like that. There are different time frames and different time frames for what we measure, and something maybe is easy and continuous measurement, something maybe need to spend some time on it. So I think that's a very important point, because people stick to KPIs. They set them once and then they measure them for 10 years and wonder why something doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So KPIs need to be reviewed on a regular basis as well. So, with the quarterly, if you adopt quarterly strategy workshops, reviews, review the strategy, review the roadmap, but also take a look at your KPIs and see if they're still relevant. It's perfectly normal for KPIs to change. A good example would be for commercial revenue generating product. Before you have an achieved product market fit and entered the growth stage, it's typically no point measuring profitability, because the product simply won't be profitable. You won't have broken even. Only once you've broken even, it makes sense to measure any profit margins that you're able to generate. So that would be a very simple thing. Or referral rate would be another one. Once you're deep into maturity, the maturity stage, assuming a traditional life cycle model, it probably doesn't make sense to look at referrals that much, because you don't really want to grow. You just want to play a defensive game and keep what you have, but not expand your market share.
Yeah. And then I just want to return really quick back to your product strategy model. You mentioned involving different stakeholders. How can product managers figure out who they should involve? Is there anything to help them figure out those stakeholders, maybe internal, external? How to go about it?
Yeah, sure. So in order to involve the right people, it's helpful to do a stakeholder analysis. And sort of the go-to tool that I use, the tool that I like to recommend, is the Power Interest Grid. There are many other stakeholder analysis tools out there, but I've always found the Power Interest Grid very helpful. Essentially, it groups stakeholders into 4 cohorts or subgroups. We've got the crowd. Those are stakeholders that aren't particularly interested in the product, and you don't really need their support. You don't really need their expertise. We've got subjects. They are interested, but you don't necessarily need their support or expertise. So that might be users for a commercial product, or somebody from HR, or another product person who works on a product, but that doesn't have particularly close connections to yours, for instance. And then we have the context setters. Those are people whose support you may need, because maybe they are senior managers or executives in the organization, but they may not be terribly interested in your product. And then we have what is called the players, and the players are, what I generally refer to as the key stakeholders. Those are the individuals you really need to involve. So those are the individuals whose expertise and knowledge you really need in order to make effective strategic decisions. So again, for a commercial revenue generating product, might be a marketeer, it might be a sales rep, it might be a customer support team member. In some cases, it might be somebody from finance. And so once you've done this analysis, and once you've figured out, oh, okay, so these are the key business stakeholders, these are the people I should align with, then think about how you want to involve them and how you want to shape that collaboration. And it could be just a loose on-demand involvement, or you could take this further and form a product team, an extended product team, a bigger product team, which would be my preference. So, often when you read about product teams, and I think, Marty Kagan was one of the individuals who made product teams and the concept of product teams popular in recent years. So thanks to Marty. Sometimes people think of product teams, they think of the person in charge of the product, like a Scrum product owner, product manager, maybe a UX designer for an end user facing product, and a software engineer or developer. And I call that small product team the core product team. But I think in order to make the effective strategic decisions, that team is just simply not big enough. So that team is usually sufficient in order to decide on product discovery and delivery. So handle product discovery and delivery related challenges and make appropriate decisions. But for product strategy decisions, that team typically lacks the relevant expertise. And that's where the business stakeholders come in, the key business stakeholders. And so by integrating them into the team, you foster close collaboration, you foster literally teamwork, and you move away from this sometimes antagonistic stakeholder, I guess, notion that we have in product management, that we think of, oh my God, those pesky stakeholders. let's try and ignore them or run away. Hi, the stakeholders are coming, because they just want to put us under pressure and tell us what to do, and they don't respect us. And so, I don't think that's a healthy approach. Ideally, I mean, I know, sometimes depending on the company culture, depending on the setup, the level of maturity of a product management function in a specific company, and the individuals involved, it can be challenging to work with some of the key stakeholders. But I think it's worthwhile trying to establish a good relationship. So you leverage their expertise, you ensure there is alignment and there is sufficient support and buy-in. I mean, the worst thing that you could do is spend a lot of time and effort in building and maybe validating a product strategy, and then the stakeholders say like, yeah, pay lip service to it, and then nobody really follows it. I mean, then I'd argue that strategy is a complete waste. You might have been better off just not even articulating, formulating, building it. So yeah, trying to move from stakeholder management, you could say, to stakeholder collaboration by forming a bigger extended product team, and carrying out then the strategy work together. And from an organizational perspective, my recommendation for organizations is to empower these product teams then to holistically own their products. So own not only delivery, not only discovery, but also own the strategy of those entities, those products, but equally hold the product teams then accountable.
Yeah, that makes sense. As always, you have to involve correct people to make correct decisions and then go and execute. That
Absolutely. I think involving the right people and setting your team up for success is probably the most important thing you can do. Otherwise it'll always be extremely challenging.
Yeah.
But potentially it'll be challenging, possibly very challenging.
Yeah. I guess it puts a lot of skill on the product manager to be that kind of person who can organize and make deals, make good connections, good relationships with all the stakeholders, so they don't sabotage and they don't put barriers, but actually help.
Yeah, that's right. So, but I generally think, that leadership skills and, people skills are very important for product people, for product managers, and often they're overlooked and underrated. Or, sometimes people think, yeah, if you hold a senior position, or if you hold a management position, if you're head of product or chief product officer, VP of product management, director of product management, then you need leadership skills. And I think that's a misunderstanding of what product management is about. I mean, product managers lead not through positional power and not by having, the power assigned to them, but they exercise what is also referred to as emergent leadership, and they still need to align people. They still need to have a group of people move forward together to achieve shared goals. But product people do this by building trust and earning the respect of the stakeholders and development teams. So yeah, it's a very important skill. Having said that, of course, as product people, we've got something else to do apart from facilitating teams and building teams, and that's why. And in addition to that, some stakeholders I've experienced were rather had showed challenging behaviors. It's not always the case, but yeah. Anyway, so in order to support product people, it can be very useful to involve a coach. And that might be a product coach, it might be an agile coach, a scrum master, it might be another skilled facilitator who works with the product manager, the person in charge of the product, and the other product team members to form a cohesive unit, and helps people work together, suggests the right approaches. I've suggested, for instance, in my book Strategize, that in order to manage the product discovery and validation work, not product discovery, strategy discovery and validation work, it can be useful to use Kanban and build a Kanban board. And I wouldn't expect that a product manager knows how to do that. I mean, it's not part of our job, really. And so, again, it can be very useful to have somebody who knows a little bit about this and guides the group through that, and knows about collaborative decision making and suggests a decision rule and guides people through that, through a decision making process, so that the product manager can actively contribute and doesn't have to be the facilitator at the same time, which can be pretty tricky. So yeah, that can be a very good solution, particularly if the people involved, the stakeholders, aren't used to teamwork, and possibly even the company culture isn't necessarily conducive to people seeing each other as peers and as team members, and dealing with each other without kind of putting any dealing with it, accepting each other as equal, essentially. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. So yeah, maybe something to consider.
Yeah. No, that's great. Yeah, right. So let me change a little bit to innovation topics. And innovations often seem like a risky or maybe uncertain projects and initiatives and things like that. So how to encourage stakeholders and product managers to include innovation as part of the product strategy?
Yeah, that's a great question. Excuse me. So I would argue that, at least to a certain extent, an effective product strategy should help facilitate innovation, and to a certain extent should enable innovation. I mean, how much innovation, what kind of innovation you need, is a portfolio management and ultimately a business management decision. So if you want to grow organically by creating products in-house, then looking at your portfolio and doing a portfolio analysis using a tool like the product portfolio matrix, which also used to be called the BCG matrix, and the growth share matrix, I believe, many years ago, but now the official title seems to be product portfolio matrix. So that can be a really, really useful tool. And what you do is you analyze how many young products you have, how many question marks you have, how many stars you have, how many cash cows you have, and how many pets you have. The pets used to be called dogs, but these days apparently they're called pets. And then once you've done this analysis, you see, is your portfolio balanced? Is it a healthy portfolio? Do you've got the right mix of older established products, cash cows, and younger up and coming products that help you generate significant amounts of cash in the future? And if that's not the case, you need to do something. You may need to get rid of some of the older products, or you may have to invest more in coming up with new initiatives in developing new products. And then, related to that, you could use another tool, the innovation ambition matrix, in order to figure out, okay, with these new products that we're developing, should they be more adjacent innovations where we serve markets that we already serve, existing markets that we know, or should they maybe be transformative or disruptive innovations where we try not only to build a new product, but also create a new market? And a good example might be the original iPhone, which was the first smartphone for consumers. And until the iPhone came out in 2007, I believe, all the smartphones were primarily marketed and directed at enterprise users, at business users. So, but yeah, for me, that's a product portfolio management topic to a much larger extent than a product strategy topic. So when I think about product strategy, I always think about an individual product or product line. So a product line would be a collection of product variants. I don't know, like Microsoft Visio Professional and Standard, for instance. That might be an example of a product line. But yeah, I think as long as you just look at an individual product or product line, it's very, very hard to make those decisions. You have to kind of zoom out and really look at the portfolio and say, like, okay, how healthy, how balanced is the portfolio? Should we make changes to it? What kind of changes should we make? And what kind of innovations should we invest in?
I see. So then, given this analogy, can we say that some features could include some sort of innovative approach maybe, or some innovative technology, emerging technology, versus some features could be just left alone, they work and we know people using it, let's not touch it, let's not break it. Could we make that analogy at the product level?
Yeah, absolutely. So I didn't want to argue or give the impression that I argue that there's no innovation taking place at the product level. Absolutely. And the degree of innovation of a product is to a certain extent correlated with the product lifecycle. So the younger a product is, the more innovation there tends to be. I mean, any product, for any product to be successful, the product, yes, has to create value, but in order to differentiate from alternatives, competing offerings, it has to do something different and in a way better. It could be cheaper, it could be more convenient, it could have a better user experience, it could have better features, more features. You could bundle it with other products or services, you name it, the various ways you can differentiate your product. An example that comes to mind is the Google Chrome browser, which was originally launched, I think, in 2008. And I think when it was launched, Google said, use this browser because it's faster, it's safer, and it's simpler to use than all of the other browsers that were out there. I like this example because it shows that you can have non-functional or operational qualities that differentiate your product. So that can also be a way to innovate. Absolutely. And then as your product kind of starts developing and growing and gaining traction, often the degree of innovation that your product exhibits is reduced. The technology stack has stabilized, the architecture has stabilized, the business model has stabilized, the feature set has stabilized, the user experience has stabilized, until you decide it's time to make a bigger change to your product and maybe to a certain extent revitalize or reinvent your product and maybe significantly change the user experience or introduce completely new technologies. And for instance, AI-based technologies, to stay with a current technology trend. So there is a correlation between how old your product is and how much innovation, uncertainty, risk, and change it tends to experience.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then again, it's probably based on the age of the product, but is there any balance between like the maintenance work and the innovation work for the product, or maybe at the portfolio level? Like from your experience, do you know how companies may be trying to balance where to invest more time and effort?
Yeah, that's another great question. And again, I think we can use the product lifecycle model to help us with that. So just very briefly, for those people watching and listening who are not very familiar with the product lifecycle model, the product lifecycle model traditionally has a development stage that includes the initial strategy discovery work, and then building a product roadmap, but also all the initial product discovery work and building then the initial product and launching that product, often referred to as an MVP, the minimum viable product. Then there's an introduction stage where you introduce the product to the market, typically address the early market innovators and early adopters, and then achieve product market fit, use their feedback to achieve product market fit, enter the growth stage. Then your product is growing. You're trying for commercial product to increase the market share, penetrate the market, and at the same time, keep it differentiated from competitors. And then at some point in time, usually growth starts to stagnate. And then if you accept that, you move your product into maturity, it becomes a cash cow, and eventually it'll decline. That's then the decline stage. And you'll then take your product off the market, retire your product, sunset your product, the various terms you can use.
Mm-hmm.
And what tends to happen is that the amount of maintenance work increases as your product ages. It's quite normal. I think for digital products, the older your product is, the larger the code base is, the more areas you tend to have in the code base that aren't maybe as clean and nicely structured and as easy to understand and maintain as you'd like to. And the harder it then can also be to make significant changes and add brand new features. And at some point in time, when your product is a mature product, when your product is in the maturity state, then that's no longer what you do. You very much focus on incremental enhancements and bug fixes. And you could say maintenance work in that sense, because you want to maximize the business benefits that your product offers and just kind of do enough work so that your product still generates enough value for the users to employ it. But in the earlier stages, particularly in the introduction and in the growth stage, you typically have to innovate. You have to change your product. You have to invest in your product. You may have to significantly change the user experience. You may have to significantly change features, remove features, add completely new features. You may have to significantly change the technology stack. The product that you launch with may not be the product that achieves product market fit in terms of the tech stack, in terms of the software architecture. So that'll very much depend on the feedback that you've received during the introduction stage. And in generally, how the products within the same category and within the same domain, in the same space, how they develop. So what your competition is doing. So there's this correlation. Having said that, I do think that it is good practice to invest in quality right from the beginning. And be aware that if we make compromises in terms of code quality, in terms of how well the code is structured, and generally, how the product or the software is architected, but also the test coverage that we have and what kind of tests we have and the degree of test automation we have, then that has a significant knock-on effect. And it means that our ability to adapt the product, change the product, and respond to changes in the marketplace and to leverage new technologies, but also then respond to threats and movements by our competitors, that is significantly reduced. So, my advice to product people is, I know we want to create value as quickly as possible, but at the same time, we want to make sure that the foundation of our product is healthy, and we want to make sure that the quality, the code quality for a digital product is good enough. So you have that solid base to build on. So in that sense, I think an element of, I don't want to necessarily say maintenance work, but refactoring and also architectural refactoring should happen on a regular basis. And I think it's important to give development teams time to do that work. That's not gold plating. It's not, I don't know. Not every piece of code has to be super duper, but it has to be good enough so that you can change it, and someone else can change it, someone else can read and understand the code. And I mean, many years ago, I earned my money for a few. I earned my living. I earned money for a few years by being a software developer, and I remember working on one supply line management application where I was working on a piece of code, and I could not understand it. Nobody else could understand that piece of code, so we had to hire back the person who wrote the code just to make a change. I mean, that's just awful, really. If that's the choice you have, rewrite a core part of your application or hire the person back. So you don't want to be in that situation. Trust me.
Yeah, that's not good. Okay, so we're almost coming to an end, and I have a couple of wrap-up questions. First one is there if there is a product manager who's struggling with defining the product strategy, what would be your advice to do as a very first step to start the process?
As a very first step to start the process. So my advice would be use a template like my product vision board in order simply just to structure your thoughts and articulate your current ideas. So, write down who you think the current target users and customers are, or the current users and customers are, I should say, apologies. So assuming the product exists, write down who currently uses the product and who pays for it. Then write down why people use the product, why they pay for it, what's the specific value it creates for them. Then write down what are the business benefit it generates. And then, particularly if it's a commercial product, write down what differentiates the product, what makes it stand out, what gives it an advantage. And then look at it and ask yourself, did I capture the strategy correctly? And is that the strategy that will help us be successful in the future? If the answer is yes, that's great. If the answer is no, you've got some work to do. And preferably don't do it on your own. Preferably involve key stakeholders and development team members, as we've discussed earlier, in that process, so you can leverage their perspectives, their understanding, their expertise, and ensure that there is alignment and there is support for any strategic decisions that you take. So that'd be my recommendation.
Okay, that's great. And then finally, you've developed a bunch of nice tools and you've written a few books. Can you please mention where people can find your work and so they can leverage all that knowledge from you and learn from you and use it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So the best place to go to is my website, romanpichler.com. So you find blog articles there, you find my podcast there, you find videos there, you find the tools and frameworks there, my books. I also teach regularly strategy and roadmap training courses, so that might be interesting potentially to look at as well. And you can also find me on LinkedIn, even so I'm not super active on LinkedIn. But I try and publish a new article every month, a new podcast episode every month, and currently also a new YouTube video every month. So maybe check out the content, maybe consider subscribing to my newsletter or my LinkedIn newsletter, just so you don't miss out on any new content or tools.
Okay, great. All right. Thank you very much, Roman, for your wealth of knowledge and sharing your knowledge and information with us. That's been great.
No, thank you. Thanks again for having me. It was really nice talking to you. And good luck to everyone with their strategic product decisions.
Yeah. Good. All right. Thank you very much. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.